let's have a lesson and discussion on this work. Follow the lesson for free and just pick up all the tips from the video. But if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of this work, and there's a link for that in the description. So this piece is originally for vihuela, and that translates to the guitar very, very well. I have the third string tuned down to F sharp, so we can play in the original tuning, which is incredibly important in this piece because there's a number of fingerings that are really only best done in this tuning. There's even some spots where we have a D and an F sharp as open strings, and that's absolutely necessary because it would be much harder to fret both of those notes while navigating all the voices. A fantasia is, it's to some extent a freeform exploration of motifs, and I think that really applies here. But the thing that you really want to do in this work is two things. Is you want to watch for imitation that occurs, so little melodic imitation across the voices. You also want a sense of a multi-voice composition. So most of the time in this piece, that's 2 or 3 voices moving horizontally, and you want voice independence on each musical line. So we have motifs that we want to watch for. We have voice independence. And also just make sure you really pay attention to sustain. There's lots of places in this piece, especially at cadences, but pretty much everywhere, where you want to sustain a voice like this A here, which resolves there, and then cadences. So keeping your fingers down, observing the sustain, maybe especially of some of the ties that I have in the work, is very, very important. But let's first talk about that motivic imitation. So why don't we just take a look at like a real clear example. So measure 10. In measure 10, we have a very clear motivic element in the bass voice. And then we have it in the upper voice. And then in the bass voice again, even though it's a little bit altered, even a little bit in that inner voice there, and then a cadence. So lots of, it's not like strict imitation or strict counterpoint, but lots of motivic unity in the piece and imitation that's happening. So throughout the whole piece, you just want to be listening for that and constantly discovering little parts where he might be doing imitation. Another great example is at measure 36, where he really introduces it very clearly by first doing a single melodic line. And then it happens in the bass. Then the upper voice. So very, very clear imitation there and the voices are entering one at a time. So we have a single voice, 2 voices, 3 voices, and then towards the cadence. And most of the time it works like that in this piece where we have some motivic exploration and then a cadence, and then it starts again with more of that. It gets a little thicker at the end, but nevertheless, that's what you're looking for. And also just throughout the piece, just making sure you have a sense of voice independence. Even at the beginning, it might feel like you're playing chords, but you don't really want to think in terms of like block chords. You kind of want to be thinking, where's the upper voice go to? Where does the middle voice go? And where does the lower voice go? One more time. And just really thinking horizontally with this piece and making sure that instead of playing just chords, you're really thinking working? Where does each one of these notes go? What voice is it part of? And when we talk about the fingering of the piece and the way I've fingered it, it's all having to do with that. Is instead of jumping fingers around for chords, sometimes I'm really holding certain fingers down to make sure a voice sustains properly into its, the following note that occurs in that voice. So yeah, in one way, this piece is super easy. There's not a lot of technical requirements, but musically speaking, there's just so much to do in this piece, and that's a subtle translation to the hands that some people aren't used to. So lots of careful attention to the musicality in this work. But let's just walk through it now. I'll mention a few more musical things, but I think it's so packed full of musical ideas that you just have to explore it as you practice and listen for things and discover new things all the time. But I'll talk about a couple of small fingering things, but I think I'll also just be playing it a little bit slower for you. I wouldn't roll too many chords. I roll the first one, I roll the occasional chord, but if you roll too many, you lose some of that voice separation and independence, but sometimes I'll start with it as a more gentle easing into it, and not to ignore the aspect of plucked instruments. Hard to remember to keep certain fingers down sometimes. Keeping that third finger down, keeping the fourth finger down, because measure 20. So some of the fingering in there all just has to do with keeping those voices sustained. Lots of cascading little lines there. It jumps across the voices there. Let me do that again at measure 36. Occasionally in this piece, because of the three voice texture, you run out of free fingers and you do have to jump something, even at that cadence there, which I didn't want to do. I have to jump the first finger over. It's going to happen sometimes in this piece, and you just want to minimize that damage by making sure that you get enough out of that note that it kind of goes into the room and sustains a little bit, and then you quickly move your finger over. Trying to cover up any little glitches. Always imitation, right? So lots of that little imitative line there, but also some real sustain you have to pay attention to. Keeping that fourth finger down until here. Measure 61. The last few measures of this work are quite a bit thicker. I have one little funny thing in there, but you know, it's not so necessary at a slightly faster tempo, but technically you want to keep your first finger on the G here and pivot it out. Technically, you're supposed to be sustaining it until it resolves to that F. We're talking about measure 76, 77 here. So I have a little pivot written in there. To get the G going to the F sharp. At slightly faster tempos, you can't really tell and you'll hear the voice connection, but I recommend that when you're practicing it slowly, do it so that you at least learn to sustain that G as long as possible and then resolve it and play that open B and then resolve to the F sharp. When you're playing it a little bit faster, maybe it's not so noticeable so you don't have to do it, but nevertheless, I put it in there because technically you're supposed to be connecting those voices. I see I lifted it there by accident. There we go. My main advice here is that when you're practicing it slowly, you want the maximum amount of voice connection and voice separation here. And you can practice it so slowly that you really get each note connecting to the next. That's very good for learning the muscle memory of the piece and training your hand to keep those notes down and to connect them. When you speed up, maybe it's not so necessary, but that muscle memory and also just your own awareness of doing that voice connection will still be in your hands and in your ears a little bit. So it's just really important in this music to develop that. And then when you go to play it, maybe not on a micro level, it's not going to happen everywhere, but nevertheless, your hands will know it, you'll know it, and it'll translate better to your audience if you know that you're doing that. You might even just be able to present it in a gestural way. So lots of focus on that, and also just have so much fun discovering all the imitation and the motivic unity of the piece. So really wonderful works, one of the great works in the repertoire, and I'm really happy to have played it and put out an edition. So check it out and enjoy.